Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Kana, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free. Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Yes, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Social, and we are here today. I'm really excited because we have Pritish here to talk to us about All Hands Up, and other stuff that we're going to speak about today, including other stuff to do with pedagogy and classroom practice. Now, Pritish, can you just quickly tell us a bit about your background and experience in education?
Yes, hi there. Thanks for having me on, first of all. Can you hear me clearly? Is that all working well?
Yeah, it's working fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so this is my 10th year of teaching. So I came into teaching through Teach First, and I was at a school in East London for a few years, then moved to a school in Wembley for a few years, and most recently, so in September 22, I joined my current school, which is Arczone Academy. My role at the moment is I'm the head of science there, and I'm also assistant principal for teaching and learning. And it's a startup school. So the school opened 3 years ago. We've only got year 7, 8 and 9 at the moment. And that has kind of led to me having kind of a strong interest in how you grow a school, how you develop culture in a school, how you ensure that not only behavior and systems are in place to help for giving an excellent education to kids, but also pedagogically, how can you make sure that the classroom runs really smoothly. So that's kind of a bit about my journey in teaching so far.
Fantastic, thank you. As I've said before, I'm really excited about this conversation. Obviously, yourself running one of the best science departments in the country, you had a progress rate of over 2, if I'm not mistaken, which is fantastic to have you on. Now, the main topic of conversation today, obviously, is All Hands Up in Education. It's caused quite a stir on Twitter recently when you posted a video about 3 weeks ago, I believe, and it was your classroom and they were all having their hands up. But we're also going to be discussing today behaviour in classrooms, development of school culture, as you spoke about, the role of form time, classroom observations and feedback, and just general school topics. And I am really, really excited about this. Now, I'm going to go on to our first topic, which is All Hands Up in Education. So just to quickly introduce the topic, for those people that don't know, that are listening today, All Hands Up is the idea that when you ask your class a question, every student in that class puts their hand up, ready, actively engaged to answer that question. Now, obviously, on a practitioner's point of view, it's fantastic because you can see that everyone's engaged. But it has caused the question: is it any different to no hands up compared to all hands up? And what is the idea behind it? So, Pritish, just tell us, what's the idea behind having all hands up?
Yes. So the way I like to explain all hands up is by kind of comparing it to the more traditional approach, which I have read quite a lot about and heard about from other schools and other teachers doing in their classrooms. And so the more traditional approach to cold calling is having kind of insisting that no one puts their hand up in the classroom, and the teachers will put a question out there and you expect that there are no hands that go up, and then the teacher can randomly pick anyone because no one's got their hands up to answer the particular question that they had posed. And the thinking behind that, there's a lot of good thinking behind that strategy. I think the main gist of the idea there is, in lots of classrooms, certainly in my classroom when I first started teaching, there'd be a couple of 3, 4, maybe 5 kids in a class who would always have their hand up and would kind of demand the teacher's attention and dominate the conversation. And as it's particularly when I was new to teaching, I was just so tempted to always go to the students who had their hands up because, well, they're the ones who want to participate, so why not let them participate? And so kind of my default thinking at the time was, you just pick the kids with their hands up, and that's great because they're getting involved, then they answer the question and the lesson moves on. You feel good because the kids look like they're making progress. The kids who are contributing look good because they're happy. The kids who didn't really want to participate are good because are happy because they didn't want to participate and didn't need to participate. And then, so I think it's quite a common problem in classrooms, and lots of teachers get the feedback which says, oh, so what you need to do actually is make sure that anyone can answer a question, because otherwise the culture in the classroom is being dominated by a few pupils. And so I get why a response to that, one response might be you insist that all hands remain down. And because all hands are down, suddenly everyone feels like they could be picked. And there's a bit more accountability in the room. There's a bit more of a chance for some of the quieter kids to have their voices heard in the room as well. So the principles behind all hands down cold calling make a lot of sense. But if we were to think about what that looks like in the classroom and contrast it to, imagine a classroom where the teacher expects every hand to go up. And when a teacher asks the question, what you see visibly in the room is, boom, all the hands go up. There's 32 hands up in the air. And the teacher's like, oh, this is amazing. Every hand is up. Let me go to Omer. And then everyone else's hands go back down. And then the teacher asks another question and all hands go up again. And just the difference in energy that you can imagine in that classroom is going to be so much more palpable. It's going to look visibly like to everyone in that room that, oh, everyone's participating. And if you have a few kids who perhaps are a bit more reluctant to participate, just the sheer culture of the room where everyone looks like they want to participate, everyone is putting their hand up, they think, I might as well give it a go because everyone else is giving it a go. So what all hands up cold calling does is it shifts the norm in the room from, oh, nobody looks like they want to participate, to everybody looks like they want to participate. Everybody's putting their hand up. And it means that the culture becomes, I might as well give it a go initially. And over time, when you then reinforce that with praise and you're asking the kinds of questions that lead to the children feeling really successful, suddenly, rather than with all hands down cold calling, where the culture might be, oh, I could be picked, we want the culture to be, I want to be picked. And I'm going to signal that by the hands, by my hand going up straight. And the teacher can see and narrate that, look, everyone wants to be picked here. This is incredible. So for me, the big difference between all hands down cold calling and all hands up cold calling is culture. And it's all about culture. It's about what it feels like to be in that room. It's about making participation really joyful. I also think just not letting the kids who really want to put their hands up express that kind of enthusiasm. It's a bit of a shame to kind of not have that enthusiasm. And I think letting them putting their hands up, encouraging those hands up is incredible. So that's the kind of headlines as to why I think it's such a powerful strategy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just for the listeners here, if you have any questions that you want to ask Pritish, just post them in this conversation and we could bring them up. But I just wanted to say, yeah, so I personally never been in a classroom that uses all hands up. So I don't want to sound like, you know, when people just say, oh, this doesn't work or this is terrible, but they haven't tried it out themselves. I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I like the idea that you said about the students having enthusiasm. The students, sorry, that do have enthusiasm, still getting that chance to put their hand up. That's kind of an angle I never thought about it from. I'm going to be honest. I have been a bit of a skeptic about the all hands up because it's been hard for me to kind of see the difference between having all hands up and no hands up in terms of cold calling. But when you say it from the perspective of active participation, and I feel like as a teacher, the feeling must be great because you've got all the hands shooting up straight away. I can see the positives to this. Now, Phil Beadle and others on Twitter have said that children in the clip you posted aren't safe. What is your response to that?
That's a good question. Yeah, when I saw that, I think my first thought was that it kind of speaks to, I mean, I don't know, because to be honest, my honest answer is I don't know, because I don't know what he meant by it, and he didn't respond when I kind of posed kind of my response to it. But I guess my interpretation of what he said was kind of, it suggests perhaps that as a country, maybe as a group of educators, we're so used to there being disruption and we're so used to pupils not participating that when you see a classroom full of pupils, because when I posted that video, it was me in my classroom and I asked a question and every single hand up in the room went up. That was perhaps so novel, perhaps it was so shocking. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, you know, the critics that said this, but my interpretation of it was that that was so unusual for people to see that people thought there must be something more sinister going on or something. You know, the language used around that video was kind of, it was very controlling, or gosh, this looks very, I don't know, oppressive, and all these kinds of extreme words. But if you speak to any of our visitors that came, if you speak to any of our teachers that teach our ArcZone Academy, and we have, you know, we've had a fair few visitors over the last couple of years. They will say, the first thing they'll say to you is, "Wow, there's real warmth and joy in the classrooms," and that's because the kids aren't, you know, we're not forcing kids to put their hand. You can't. You saw me in the video clip. There's no way I can force a child to put their hand up. They're doing it because that's what the culture is, and this is how powerful the culture is. So what I would say to kind of the critics of that clip is, you know, we need to expect more from our pupils. We got to be able to expect the adults in the room to lead the learning, and we got to expect that we can hold pupils to account for their participation, but also, so that's the kind of at one end, there's a sense of accountability where I want everyone to be participating, but also you're creating a culture where participating is joyful and it's a wonderful thing. One of the things I'm most proud of at ArcZone Academy actually is we not only with answering questions do we have a real culture of participation, but even with things like reading aloud. We all use booklets in various subjects. We do inform time, we do class readers. And one of the things that always blows me away every time I go and observe lessons is the pupils who put their hands up to volunteer to read are often the ones who are most shy, often the ones who you might think are most anxious. I have got kids who have stammers and stutters or have speech delays, and their hands are constantly flying up, volunteering to read when we're reading from the booklets or the class readers that we're reading. And I always, you know, something I always tell the staff in my school is whenever you see things that make you go, wow, you know, don't think, wow, ask how. How is this possible? What's the culture that's meant the kids you would expect perhaps in other places not to volunteer to read or answer questions? Why are they doing that here at Zone, where that might not have been your experience previously? So if you use that mantra of don't think wow, ask how, you start to unpick why that is. And the reason is because the kids feel so safe in the school and in the classroom that they feel like the thing that they're perhaps very vulnerable about, which is if a kid has a stammer, they're not going to want to read in front of other pupils, but they do at Zone because they know that the culture of the school, the behavior is so strong that there's no one else is going to laugh at them for stammering or stuttering. If anything, there's going to be encouragement. And second of all, the teacher, they know, is going to help them finish off any sentences they struggle with, but also, and most importantly, praise them when they do. And so when they finish reading a sentence, it's not uncommon for teachers to go, oh, what a beautifully read paragraph, merit for you, so-and-so. What wonderful reading. Or if they struggled, oh, I know you found that a bit tricky. Let's try that word together as a class. I say, you say, whatever the word is, I don't know, photosynthesis, and everyone says it together. Great. Oh, I struggled with that word as well when I first read it, so I'm not surprised you did too. But really, really great reading from you there. Well done. Merit for you. And that, all those things together means that we have a culture where the kids feel safe and secure enough that they try, where they will give it a go, where even if they think they're going to get the answer wrong, they're going to participate. And I think that's the kind of culture that all schools should aspire to have. I would want my children to go to a school where they felt safe and secure enough to participate every single time, because giving it a go is so important. Being praised for giving it a go is really important. It's not about getting it right every single time. Everyone's in school because they're learning, they're going to make mistakes. But are you then listening to that feedback? Did you give it a go? Are you giving it your best shot? That is the culture we're aiming for. And I think that's what I would want kind of all schools to be like. And I don't think many people would disagree with that. So I think when it comes to being safe in the classroom, I think this is what safety in the classroom ultimately looks like.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, sorry.
Omer, we're starting to get some questions coming in and some thoughts as well. If you've got a question, you can use the bottom right speech bubble to ask your question, and we'll pin them to the top so Omer, our host, can read. One of those questions is from Miss Banda, which is, how did you go about rolling out all hands up and other strategies with the department?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So rolling something out like this requires there to be, I think there has to be, well, I guess my advice would be different depending on your context, because I think context is very important to consider here. So the context of Arc Zone is that at the moment, we're quite a small school. We started rolling all hands up last year, where we had 2-year groups, and we did some whole staff training on it. We discussed the difference between all hands down and all hands up cold calling, and we painted the picture a bit like I did at the start of this show, where we discussed what classrooms look like that are where all hands are down and all hands are up. We then talked about how we're going to introduce this to the pupils. So we said, and it's not just, there has to be a bigger framework around it. It's not just, you can't just go into the classroom and say, right, I'm going to expect all hands up. It only makes sense to have all hands up for questions that all kids can actually answer or give it a go to. So if I ask a really tricky question, but I haven't really, as a very thinking kind of question, I'm not going to get all hands up. And even now, I wouldn't expect all hands up for every question in my classroom. So if that becomes the first consideration to train teachers in, which is in your school or your department, which is, what kinds of questions are you planning into your lesson that all pupils you would expect to have the answer to? And that's where the idea of checks for listening come into it. So we then introduce the idea of what a check for listening is, which is a really simple question where people just essentially repeat something that you said moments earlier. And the expectation is that because pupils are listening, that check allows them to show you that they are listening. So an example would be something like, let's say if I'm carrying on with photosynthesis, I might say, so plants carry out photosynthesis in the chloroplasts of their cells. Which part of the cells does photosynthesis happen in? All hands up. And that kind of question you would expect, every single pupil to be able to answer. And so we tied the kind of question that you need to ask with the strategy. And then we said to staff, this is how you go about narrating it. So you might say something, when you first introduce it, you might say, right, I'm going to be asking you a few questions and I expect every hand to go up. Every single person needs to participate when I ask these questions to show me that you're listening. I'm going to be most impressed if arms are super straight and you're projecting your answer really well, for example. And then it's all about the narration and the encouragement. And so if you only have half the hands go up, you're like, come on, I've got half the hands up already. This is incredible. I need to see the other half contributing as well. And initially, it's difficult because if you're shifting a culture, it's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. Luckily, as a school, we were in a position where a few teachers were already doing this, and it just became more about making it consistent. But if you're in a school where this isn't the norm, I think what you then need to do is you need to have a kind of points where you're reflecting and discussing what the barriers are to people's putting their hands up. And there's lots of things that, and one of the reasons I think this strategy is so wonderful is it's quite revealing of what the culture is like in the school or in a particular class or in a particular year group. Because if you're doing lots as a teacher and hands still aren't going up, then suddenly you're revealing a problem which you may not have noticed before. So with all hands down cold calling, there might be kids just getting away with not really trying, and it might take you a while to pick up. Whereas the clever thing about all hands up cold calling is it visually, it's like magic dust you sprinkle over a classroom. Suddenly you can see who's, despite you kind of removing all the friction, you're asking an easy question, you're requesting all hands to go up. There's already loads of kids putting their hands up, so the culture's starting to change. And there's still 3 kids who aren't putting their hand up. Suddenly you now know who you need to speak to at break time and try and investigate. Oh, what's stopping you from putting your hand up? It was a real shame I didn't see your hand up. Is everything okay? What's going on? And you can start to investigate. And that might reveal to you something important about those 3 pupils, let's say, and you've got that data really quickly. You've got that information. These 3 kids don't want to participate. What's going on? Why? Is it just that they're not paying attention? Is it that there's something going on which means they need a bit more support to participate and they're just maybe really nervous about it? I don't know. Whatever it might be, you now have the power to investigate. And so I think it's one that will take time, because there might be new things that are unearthed. It might be that they think, oh, other kids laugh when I get the answer wrong. And therefore it makes you realize, oh my gosh, maybe there's a culture in this classroom where some kids have been getting things wrong and other kids have been laughing, and I as the teacher haven't picked up on it yet. I need to go away and now address this and do something to make the classroom culture and build a culture of error, as Doug Lemov calls it, in my classroom as well. And so that's another reason why I think this strategy is so powerful, somewhat ironically, at making classrooms safer, because it allows you to unearth problems that perhaps were flying under the radar, or they're certainly revealed sooner because you can see visibly who isn't participating. So depending on where your school's at, there might be different layers and levels of how much work you need to do to start implementing this in your school. Those are kind of, I guess, my headlines around that question. And then it's just about reinforcing it with feedback. So pop into each other's lessons and see how the teacher's narrating it, see how the kids are responding to it. And there might be specific things in the room that you might realize teachers need feedback on to push them to the next steps. Those would be my main bits of advice for that.
Thank you very much. Now, I just wanted to say that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324. That was JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Now, just on what we were saying there, I'm going to take from what you just said. I don't want to spend too much longer on this, but there is a few things that kind of came to my head. Obviously, the worst case for scenario for a teacher that's just kind of asked a question to a random person. I mean, I'm talking about no hands up, all hands up. I picked a random student. I've asked them to answer this question, and they've said, "What was the question?" Yeah, that's possibly one of the worst case scenarios, because okay, I'm checking for listening. These students, or this student in particular, was not listening. And I think an argument that a lot of people are thinking, people are saying this is unsafe. I think the way you just painted that image, it does seem really a really safe environment, and it's about being reflective as a teacher and trying to build up that classroom culture. That's kind of what I've got from what you were saying. So my question kind of develops into this, because I think a lot of people, when they think of the idea that all students have their hands up, is kind of all students have been forced to have their hand up. And I feel like this is where a lot of people kind of seeing this in a negative way. But my question is, what happens to students that, let's say, are just outright being defiant in that particular situation? So you've asked for all hands up. There's some students that just happen to be a bit lazy. They don't want to put their hands up along with the rest of the class. What happens in that scenario?
It's a good question. This is where I think the culture of the school becomes quite important, and that's what I was saying earlier about you then have to investigate and dig into why someone's not putting their hand up. In my experience at Sohn, this doesn't happen. Like, the kids do put their hands up. Some kids might need a nudge and a reminder, particularly, if you can tell, some of them are just a bit sleepy, especially first day back after the holidays. Some of them have been going to bed at, Lord knows what time in the morning, and therefore they're a bit sluggish. But with just a nudge, come on, and you see your hands up, every hand is going up. So we don't really get a case where someone just doesn't ever put their hand up. That just doesn't happen. And I think that speaks to a lot of things, which is the idea of culture. Most kids do want to participate, and if the culture is right, they will want to participate. If you reinforce getting answers right with lots of warm praise, kids love feeling successful, so they will participate. And you can see it in the way the kids put their hands up as well. So sometimes you can say, the way you narrate things can make a big difference. If I say, even if it's kind of not the trickiest question in the world, but you say, this one's a bit trickier than the one I've asked before, I wonder who's going to get this, and then you frame the question, not only will you see hands go up, but you'll see people trying to reach for the ceiling because they really want to show, if it's a tricky one, I can do it. And that speaks again to the culture in the room. It speaks to the sense that we know all pupils, because all human beings feel the same way, is if we're set a challenge, we quite like to rise to that challenge. And so if there were kids that weren't participating, like I said before, you need to then speak to those kids individually and find out what's going on. Because it might just be that they're being lazy, as you said, and they're not participating, in which case they need to be held to account. Because if there is a kid who is, being, quote, lazy, they're just choosing not to participate, then I would be letting them down if I allow them to not participate. It's my duty as a teacher to ensure all of my students are making the most of the lesson when they are in my classroom. And I would expect the same of any member of staff at Sohn to do the same. And so that idea of accountability is hugely important, because if you don't hold those pupils to account for participating, they're not going to get as much out of the lesson, and therefore they won't learn as much. And if they're not going to learn as much, then they're not going to succeed. They're not going to do the thing we need them to be doing in that room in that time, which is to learn. And so whatever the school system is for holding kids to account in that way, you need to follow that system, whatever that might be in your school, whether that's speaking to the pupil and that form tutor, seeing if there's any other issues, calling home, speaking to the families, discussing this idea of participating in lessons. At the end of the day, you want, when kids come to school, you want them participating, because participating allows them to learn. And I think that as teachers, as adults in the room, we have to be unafraid of then saying, if they're not doing that, we're going to hold them to account. I think in the short term, it might, if that means that the kids feels a bit, they don't like being held to account, then so be it. But in the long term, that's going to be the thing that transforms their future. That's going to be the thing that allows them to succeed in that subject at school. And then they'll be part of the culture that everyone else in that room is part of, which is we're participating, we're enjoying, we're learning. And that should be the goal in all classrooms.
Thank you. Anthony, who's commented on this post, if I can find it, has made a fantastic comment. He said, conversely, forced to keep their hands down, which is, I guess the other side of it is, if I'm telling all students to keep their hands down, in a way, I'm also forcing those students to keep their hands down as well. So looking at it from the other perspective, I guess that is true. Now, my last kind of question on this type of topic is, how can you tell, and this is just general, I'm just genuinely interested here, how can you tell who is simply just putting their hands up to kind of fit in? Like, let's say you ask a question. I've heard that, when you finish a question, you kind of, the pitch of the tone kind of goes up a little bit. So I've realized you've asked a question. I've seen other people put their hands up, and I just put my hands up as well. But I don't actually know the answer. How can you tell when students are doing that and they're not really listening?
That's a really great question. That is where it comes down to the sampling. So there's different means of participation you might use for all hands up questions. So often the kind of questions I use for check for listening, if they're a one-word answer, we do at SOAN what's called a call or response. So I say on 3, 1, 2, 3, and the class in unison shouts the answer out. It might be respiration, for instance. And you're just looking, seeing is everyone, you're kind of quickly scanning. And if there are 1 or 2 kids who aren't saying anything, again, you know that maybe they're not paying attention, and then you might investigate further. And if it's just a full sentence answer you're expecting, so all hands have gone up, and then you pick on a pupil, and they are unable to answer it, then you need to find out, is it because they just for some reason stumbled over the wording, or is it they weren't paying any attention at all? If it's the case that they weren't paying attention, so let's say they say, oh, I'm not sure, and you might say something like, oh, what was the question that I've just asked? And you can very quickly tell, because they'll, from the look on their face, from what they then say next, that they just weren't attentive in that moment. Then again, it comes down to what is your policy as a school. If a pupil's not paying attention to you as the teacher in that moment, what do you do? Now at SOAN, our expectation is that the pupils are paying attention to the teachers throughout the lesson. And so if there have been moments where you haven't paid attention, we then hold the pupils to account for that. And so there is that, whatever that looks like in your school, there needs to be some sort of accountability, because what that then does is it shifts, because some pupils will be in the habit of just not listening, and we need to get them into the habit of listening. And that's why the praise, the warmth, the love, and the merits come into it. But equally, the flip side, there needs to be some sort of accountability there as well, whether that's demerits or coming back to them later, or whatever it might look like in your school. You need a way of shifting their habit so they become the kind of person that does pay attention. Because once you shift that habit and they start being attentive, and this is a transformation at SOAN that we see in our pupils every year in year 7, they come in and they start off and their attention's a bit ropey, and then within a few days, they're so used to being asked loads of questions throughout the lesson that their attention increases. And some of them will say, oh, I'm so much better at paying attention now than I was before, because of the accountability that we have there. And I think that that's really powerful, because if you change their habits and you develop from year 7, you become the kind of person who can pay attention throughout a lesson. That is going to do wonders for your progress in all your subjects. And that's going to have a remarkable impact, a cumulative effect over the 5 years or 7 years that you're at that school for as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, because if students are paying attention, the more they pay attention, the more they absorb, and the more they're absorbed, then the better the outcomes. Now, it seems like in your school that you have excellent behaviour. You're asking students to put their hands up, all the hands are going up, and I think essentially and you've spoken about, obviously, keep staying positive, narrating the positive, and showing warmth to the students. But some people, again, they see all hands up as like a very strict kind of policy, although you've explained it really well, and you've explained how it's actually very good to kind of identify students that have fallen behind for whatever reason. And my question to you, though, is what are effective strategies to manage disruptive behavior without stifling student expression?
I think that it depends what you mean by expression. So I think the beauty of things like checks for listening, all hands up, is if you don't do those strategies, I imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that I probably ask more questions in 50 minutes than you do if you're not doing that kind of thing. So I would argue that my students get more opportunities than in other classrooms to answer questions, and therefore express their thoughts on what they've just heard, articulate what they've just understood. If I was to do a tally, I suppose, if I go into any SOAN lesson in any one question, every single pupil probably gets to answer out loud at least. Well, if we're using call or response, where everyone gets to say something, every kid will probably answer, I don't know, like 15 questions a lesson, 10 questions a lesson out loud on top of what they write down. So there's huge numbers of opportunities for people to share their answers. We use turn and talk a lot as well. And, you know, listeners might want to check out on my blog. My latest post is on turn and talk. And that was also in that clip as well, you saw. So every opportunity, every lesson, there's 15 or 20 opportunities people might get where they practice their answer. But the other thing I would say on that is, you know, the kids learn so much because at Zone we're using direct instruction. So I teach them explicitly about lots of things and then get them to think about lots of things with the knowledge that they then get. The quality of questions that I get from the pupils is phenomenal. I'm always blown away. In fact, I think I put this tweet out recently, but I have in my year 8 class that you saw that clip with, I've just said to one of the pupils, every time I say, whoa, that was an incredible question, can you just write down at the back of your book what that question is? So she's my little scribe for the incredible questions, and that page is filling up. We only started this a few weeks ago, and the page is already filling up with just the most incredible questions that I get from the kids. And what that shows me is the kids are learning, absorbing lots of knowledge, but they're also understanding it and thinking so hard about it that they're able to ask questions that make me, a subject expert who's been teaching for 10 years, pause and think, oh, how am I going to answer this question? Because it's phenomenal. And I think that is in science anyway, that's the ultimate kind of form of expression that I would want from my pupils, which is they're grappling so well with the ideas that they're able to then think and ask a question beyond the curriculum, beyond what I would be expecting them to think about, because they're so deeply engaged and they have such a firm knowledge base of the things that I have taught them. So a good example of this would be, we've talked about gravitational fields. So they know that any objects that have mass have a gravitational field around them. And then I said, right, so we've learned about fields before in that context, but now we're going to learn about magnets. And I started explaining magnetic fields around magnets. And one of the people put their hands up straight away and said, so if something attracts to a magnet, how do we know it's because of the magnetic field and not because of the gravitational field? That the reason that, I don't know, a paperclip moves towards a magnet. And I've never had that question before. And this is year 8. So this is what, like 12 and 13-year-olds. I was blown away. I had to pause for a second. I could answer the question, but just I was kind of gobsmacked that someone had understood these things so deeply that they were able to ask a very scientific question. And I think that shows how incredible the strategies that we've been using are, because it's allowed this deep thinking and this expression of this thought that popped into this student's head, and she had the confidence to ask it in front of the whole class. And that question was celebrated to reinforce that culture of expressing your thoughts in science, as it were. So I think, if anything, this is the ultimate form of expression in science, when you teach them well enough and they feel safe enough to ask questions that make you go, this is incredible.
Yeah, that's a fantastic explanation there, because in my school we use explicit instruction as well, explicit direct instruction, and I do find that sometimes students do ask really good questions. I have so much questions to ask just of that, but I just wanted to quickly go to Tom Rogers, who's asked a question in the comments here. It says, I think this is related to the previous item that we was talking about. It says, what is the accountability in terms of attention, listening? What does that look like in practical terms in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at SOAN, we have a system of merits and demerits. So when people answer questions correctly, they get a merit. And if they answer, when I say answer incorrectly, we have to be really specific here. If a pupil was not attentive and just that, then they could get a demerit from their teacher because they weren't paying attention. And it's the same with anything else. So if a kid is, if the kid whispers over their teacher while the teacher's speaking, they're being inattentive, that would be a demerit. If I ask a simple check for listening question and they don't get it, and I'm sure that it's because they weren't attentive, so I say to them, so what was the question? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Or did you practice that with your partner? And they're like, oh, actually I wasn't, I was talking about something else. That would be a demerit. And then 2 demerits is an after school 15 minutes detention or reflection, or what we call it reflections in our school. And so that's the system of accountability. But it's not just the case where you just say to people, that's a demerit, and move on. You explain to them, look, I need you to be paying attention. That's going to be a demerit, unfortunately. If you're not paying attention, you're not learning. I need you to be in the habit of listening. So we always narrate that it comes from a place of love. I want you to get better at listening. I want you to succeed. And therefore, I will hold you to account. Now, to some people, that might seem great, and they might think, wow, that's real accountability. Some people might hear that and think, oh my goodness, detentions for not listening, that's outrageous. But I actually think it's quite rare actually to give out detentions for that kind of thing, because the culture is so quickly established and the praise is so strong and warm and loving that actually detention is very strong at SOAN for that reason. But it's there just to catch pupils that might not be particularly attentive in the given time. And they are so responsive to it. They, when you then go down in after school to speak to those kids, because that's what we do at SOAN as well. When you give it attention, you go and have a chat with them. They're always able to articulate well why it is that they're there and that they need to be listening more, essentially. And then you see that the next lesson, or even after they get it in the moment, a demerit. Often demerit's a good enough reminder, and then they're with you fully. So that's what accountability looks like as well.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries, and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Kana, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT, and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free! Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Sorry.
I just thought I'd share this as well. One of the teachers in my department has just messaged me. She's listening in as well. She's like, I've had some incredible questions as well from my class, and I haven't shared them with you yet. So it's not just in my classroom; it is a department-wide thing and a cultural-wide thing where the kids are thinking so hard that the idea of asking really good questions is widespread around the school. And again, that just speaks to the power of culture that a school and a department can have.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think obviously in science, traditionally, I find that a lot of students just find science quite tough. Maybe because it's kind of a mix between like maths and you have to really understand what you're learning. So having a class and a school where students are asking really interesting questions in science is fantastic to hear, because that's the interest, that's the passion that you want to see as a science teacher, and in your case as a head of department. I have a question here.
Can I just add something there very quickly? Sorry to interrupt. Just to make it really clear, if you ask a different type of question, so a check for understanding, so you're kind of trying to figure out, do they get it? Can I move on as the teacher? And they get that wrong, that would not be a demerit. That is not something you're holding the kids to account for. And I think that distinction is very important, because you want kids to make mistakes in the classroom, but you don't want them to lose attention. And that's the difference between where you hold kids to account and where you don't hold kids to account. You're holding kids account to listen, when it comes to understanding, your job there is to make sure that you gather that data and you think, oh, that's so interesting, you got that incorrect, but let's dig into that. That's quite a common mistake. Let's fix that together. So mistakes are very much not encouraged, I suppose, but you're welcome to make mistakes in the classroom, but you need to be paying attention, and we need to support the kids to make attention. And I should also add there as well, is the reason I feel comfortable giving a demerit for someone who's not listening is because I've done a million other things to set them up for success. Our desks are in rows, so the kids are already looking towards me. We use 3-2-1 slant, for example. So I've given a really clear signal to them that I need your full attention. This is not a chance for you to carry on writing or, you know, carry on discussion with your partner or anything like that. Your attention is on me while I'm speaking. And then I give a really clear explanation. I might use a visual to support me. And then I ask a question and they still get it wrong. I've done so much to support you. The desks are in rows. I've said 3-2-1 slant. I've checked everyone's eyes are on me. No one's still writing. I've asked you a listening question, a check for listening question, and you still got that wrong. I've done everything I can to support you, and you've still not answered. You've still not paid attention. And I think it's important to say that, because when you hold kids to account, it's important that you've also set them up to succeed. Because if I didn't have all those other things in place, then suddenly attention might not be fully in their control. If they're not facing me, or I haven't checked that they've put their pen down, and then I ask them a question, and then I start giving them a demerit, but I wasn't clear, and I didn't make it clear they shouldn't still be writing, then of course they're not going to be listening, and that would be really unfair. So we only ever sanction or give a demerit for something that's entirely within the pupil's control, because the teacher has set up the conditions so that they have been set up to succeed, and then the accountability is fair. And I think that's a really important point to make, because it can very easily be misinterpreted.
Just as a follow-up from that, this is just for our listeners here. When you say a check for listening question, I'm guessing you mean something that's like a simple recall question based on something that you just explained. So for example, I don't know, photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. But a check for understanding question, and you ask them, okay, where does I don't know, photosynthesis take place? But a check for understanding question would be when you want students to think a bit more deeply. So and there. In a check for understanding question, if they aren't able to access that question, then you're perfectly fine with that. Am I correct in those kind of definitions?
Exactly right. Yes.
Cool. Perfect. Now I have a question here from a user. It's Shako. I don't know if I pronounced that right. UK or Shak UK, and it says, what strategy do you use to track that all pupils have had an opportunity to talk or answer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So all teachers at SOAN will have a copy of the seating plan in front of them. And so that seating plan is just a series of kind of quite big boxes that correspond to the tables where the kids are sat. And I just always have that on a clipboard and a pen in hand while I'm teaching, which is just on my desk. And then once someone asks the question correctly, I say, great, merit for you, Omar. And then I put a tally on Omar's name. And that's quite easy to do, because it's like a physical copy of the seating plan. It doesn't require any kind of cognitive effort really to note it down or find the kid, because it corresponds to where they're sitting physically in the classroom. So it's just a case of tallying it up. And then let's say 10 minutes into the lesson, when all hands are up again, I'm like, let's see who hasn't got a merit yet. Let's go to so-and-so, and then you go to the other person who hasn't yet got a merit, for instance. Or you might come back to someone who you know struggled earlier, whatever it might be. So seating plan, tally is the best way to go for that.
Fantastic, thank you. I just wanted to quickly make a mention that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324. That was JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Now I wanna move slightly on here because you've kind of brushed on the topic of school culture quite a bit, and I want to kind of tackle that. But whilst I'm going on it, I want to make a quick note. So for me personally, I've very recently moved into another school in my trust, and so this school has only recently been taken over by our trust, and so the culture isn't quite where it was at the previous school that I was at, and so I guess my question is, I've observed that I think there hasn't quite been a buy-in by all the teachers at this new school that I've gone to, like in Jan. So my question is, what role do you think teachers and school leaders play in shaping the culture of a school?
That's a really good question. I think leadership is hugely important when it comes to setting, establishing, maintaining culture in a school. So I think that for culture is a tricky one because it sounds very abstract, doesn't it? And culture is an easy word to use to describe the things you see, but the word culture doesn't necessarily help you to arrive to that point. And so it requires leaders to have a real clarity about what things should look like in the school, in the classroom. It also requires leaders to have a really clear sense of how they're going to achieve that culture, and that has to involve there has to involve consistency. I think consistency is both the hardest thing but also the most necessary thing for a strong culture in a school. But achieving consistency, if we keep going kind of upstream here, to achieve consistency you need everyone to agree in your staff body as to what that excellence looks like. And in order for everyone to agree on that consistency, you need a shared understanding of what good teaching looks like, what good behavior looks like, what good behavior management looks like as well. So, for example, I've spoken about holding kids to account. If you have lots of teachers who just don't think that ensuring that 100% of kids are paying attention 100% of the time in your classroom is desirable or right or ethical or whatever kind of some of the critics have said, then it's going to be very difficult to achieve because the consistency won't be there. And if half the staff are not holding kids to account for paying any attention and the other half are, the other half are going to find it really difficult because not everyone is rowing together. And in order for that boat to keep moving in that direction you want it to go in, all your oars have to be in order and everyone needs to be rowing at the same direction at the same pace. And that requires the leaders at the top to share their expectations of what things need to look like in the classroom, and then hold staff to account for it as well, in the same way that we've talked about accountability more broadly. So I think leaders have an important role there in making sure there's a shared understanding of what that looks like. And they give support to the staff to say, this is how I want you to implement this. This is why it's so important we do this, so that staff buy into that vision. And I think without that, it's difficult because without the consistency, if a child can get away with something in one class and then be held to account for it in the other class, it's hard to make a habit then. Whereas I think at SOAN, we've got to a point where because staff are on the same page about behavior, about teaching and learning, we can then do training on something, a new strategy. Everyone goes away and will faithfully implement it. And it's incredible to see when you go into classrooms, the consistency with which routines, questioning strategies, accountability strategies, warmth and culture and praise are all so consistent from classroom to classroom. It's a beautiful thing to see because the kids don't think, oh, I'm going to do this in this classroom, but then here I'm going to behave slightly differently. They just know. And that certainty then reduces any friction or any resentment that might build up in the kids. Because if a kid thinks, oh, I'm being held to account and that's not fair, sir lets me do this, then it becomes much harder. And we just don't get that at SOAN because the kids know the expectations from all the teachers will be the same. So I think that's where leadership becomes vital to ensure that consistency.
I completely, by the way, agree with what you just said there, having literally just experienced it, because at my previous school, lots of teachers was on board. Pretty much every classroom there was singing from the same hymn sheet. All the teachers, so the kids expected the same experience in every classroom. And then when as I've just moved to this new school, I find that I'm kind of having conflicts with students about very, very simple requests that should just be, if everyone was singing from the same hymn sheet, it should just be kind of just happen. Like, it shouldn't really be that major of a problem. But where it's not consistent, I'm finding that I'm struggling with these type of problems. Now, you've mentioned about how leaders should hold their teachers to account. How does in your school, how do teachers go about tracking teachers and holding them to account?
That's a really good question. So we have a culture of high frequency, low stakes observations. So we have teachers popping into each other's room all the time. And teachers have actually been, so they have an extra time on their timetables as well, where they're free to go and observe. And it's something that we regularly encourage staff to be doing. And so when we're popping to each other's lessons, we send each other feedback emails. So I might pop into someone's classroom, or someone might pop into my classroom and just say, oh, these are things I'm taking away, really liked this. Oh, look out for this. Oh, this kid was fidgeting and they weren't really paying attention and you didn't notice, look out for them next time. Or I don't know, the routine is meant to be this, but you said this, just make sure that we're being consistent on the language here next time. And it's all low stakes, it's just there for, the teachers to have that feedback, essentially, because we're doing so, like, schools are so complex, aren't they? And there's so many moving parts to a lesson, to a routine. So we do lots of feedback there to ensure that, the more feedback you get, the better calibrated you'll be. That is the bottom line, isn't it? Whereas I think in most schools, the feed from speaking to, when my team tell me about their previous schools, they might say I'm observed once a term or once a year, whereas at Sown they're probably observed once a week, if not that. And that's just from me in my department, for instance. I try to observe once a week, but they'll certainly be getting feedback once or twice or sometimes 3 times a week. And sometimes when staff are new, they might be observed every day for the first couple of weeks, or nearly every other day for the first couple of weeks. So the sheer amount of feedback just helps calibrate a lot. We, again, same thing that I talked about with setting people up for success before you hold them to account. We also have lots of training in place. So when new staff join Sown, we have 1 day of inset dedicated just to new staff, where we teach them all the routines. They practice all the routines. We give them tons of feedback on the routines. And then we have the first few days of inset. After that, we have just year 7 coming in for a few days, and the new staff teach the year 7s. And then we give the new staff feedback so that they can, in a lower stakes way than with teaching the older year groups, they get lots of feedback on the consistency of the routine, the language, the behavior. So we're really setting staff up to succeed in that regard, and that, I think, is really helpful for them. And then, those members of staff might meet with their head of department. So the science team and I will meet roughly once a week, and they might come to me with all their feedbacks. They might say, oh, I got this feedback from you, and I got this feedback from this English teacher that came to see me, and this other maths teacher came to see me, and they said this. And then we discuss what their priority should be in terms of what they should focus on, or I might just give them some quick bit of advice. We might do a quick bit of practice. And that way, we're kind of ensuring that I'm kind of holding my staff to account to make sure they're listening to, responding to all the feedback, and they're prioritizing it as well, because it can be quite overwhelming if you're getting so much feedback to decide what are my 2 priorities that I'm going to work on this over the next couple of weeks or this week, and kind of that support's there to make sure they're working on it. And the next week after that, I'll say, have you been doing that? How do you think it's been going? Are you in a better position? I came to see you, and this still needs work, but you've made really good progress here. And so that's the way. There's real dialogue, there's real conversation around it to ensure that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Perfect. Now, you mentioned new teachers. You've kind of touched on it a little bit, But do you find that new teachers kind of, there's a lot of systems and lot of kind of ideas that they have to learn? Do you think they struggle with that, or do you think they kind of have a smooth transition into the school?
Oh, it is tough. It is very tough because there's so much to be consistent on. There's a lot of unlearning that staff have to do, especially if you've been teaching with different systems, different routines from other schools. But again, that's something we say to staff explicitly. I tell my team it's going to be tough. The first term is going to be very difficult. You're going to feel like you're underwater, and it's going to feel tough. But you just got to keep going. You just got to keep on speaking to me, checking in with me, and I'll give you any support you need. But you will get there. And I can see some of my staff listening in, giving the thumbs up to that. And the whole point is it is difficult, but it's necessary, because if we want the standards to be incredibly high, it's going to be tough to get there. But I think we narrate to our staff quite explicitly that it will be tough at the start, but over time it will get easier, you'll get better, and it will all be worth it, because at the end of the day, the lessons, the culture is so beautiful, and there's so much joy that comes out of it. It does make all the effort worth it, and I think the teachers feel that as well, because they know they look at the classrooms and they think this is incredible, the amount of progress there is, and they know they're doing it for the kids ultimately. One of my teachers has said to me, it's for the kids, and they recognize that. And because the teachers ultimately have the kids' best interests at heart, they realize, and we all realize, that feeling overwhelmed with all the routines and stuff at the start is worth it, because it means the kids get the best opportunities, and then the staff develop loads as well. That the learning curve is phenomenal. Like at Sohn, whether teachers are brand new to the profession, because we have some trainees, whether they're ECTs, whether they're more experienced staff, the one thing they all say is the learning curve in the first couple of months at Sohn is incredibly steep. So it's tough, but it's also incredibly rewarding, because they feel like their practice comes a long way. And that speaks to the power of culture, again, the power of routines, and the power of the leadership in the school, and the consistency that we have.
Now, I have got a question here from, let me see, it's from, I'll keep pronouncing this wrong, I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, it's Shaq UK. It says, what strategy, sorry, no, that wasn't it. It was, what are your thoughts about instructional coaching as a tool for team development? Before I go on to this question, though, I wanted to make a quick note myself, because when I first started teaching, I was in a school where I had constant and frequent learning visits. So as you mentioned, it was like high frequency, low stake observations. Consistently, I might get like 2 a week, 3 a week, but I felt like that actually did make me improve quite fast, because the notes that people was telling me meant that I can kind of reflect back really well on what I was doing wrong, and make sure I was doing like the right things at the right time. We've now moved on, and this is why this question is quite relevant, because we've now moved on to a more kind of instructional coaching, where we've teamed up with like 1 or 2 teachers, and I get observed by someone, and someone else comes and observes me, which I feel like is a very good strategy, but it isn't, I feel, frequent enough, because it means that one person has to now find the time in their timetable to make sure they come and observe me weekly. What are your thoughts? So do you use instructional coaching? Do you have like a team where you're teaming up with teachers, and or is it just like you, for example, walk into any classroom in your department?
Yeah, it's the latter more so. So heads of department will observe their team roughly once a week, and give them feedback. We don't necessarily limit it to one bit of feedback and one action step. I'll often say, depending on how long I observe, if I'm there for 5 minutes, I might say, here's 2 things that went well, here's 2 things to work on. If I'm there for 20 minutes, I might say, here's 10 things that went well, and here's 8 things that could be fixed. It's just whatever I notice, I will put in that email. And then it's up to the member of staff, because what I don't want to do with my department is not say something if I've spotted something's wrong, because I think that knowledge is power. But then we have enough trust in our staff to then go away and think about that feedback and think, do you know what? 2 of these things are just really quick fixes. One of them is just something I need to look out for a bit more. The other thing is something I'd completely forgotten, but I'll remember next time. but this one, oh gosh, this one's a bit tricky. I think I need to practice this. And then they, in that one-to-one that staff have with their HODs, they then say, they might talk through that feedback and say, oh, this is the feedback I've received. These are the things I think I can quite easily fix, or and this is the one thing I want to focus on loads. Do you think that's right? Is that the right priority? And then we have that discussion. So it's more down to heads of department. The risk of that, of course, is that it can be quite overwhelming to get lots of feedback. And so that is a danger there. But I think that's where the conversation with the HOD becomes so important, because you can just say to the team, you can say to the member of staff, okay, this is your priority. The other stuff is something we can fix later on, but let's focus on this over the next couple of lessons, next couple of weeks, depending on how complex that action step is. The risk of focusing, just giving one bit of feedback per week, is that there might be lots of quick little fixes that you then deprive teachers of noticing, when there can be things they can go away and it might be something that they can digest and they can go away and take. And some of it might be knowing your staff as well. So if you know that some of your staff prefer to receive lots of little bits of feedback and some prefer less, you can definitely tailor your approach as well. So I think it's important to have that kind of flexibility in the system, rather than systematizing it to the level of one action step per week and that's it. I'm not saying that's what instructional coaching necessarily always is, but that can be how I've heard some schools have their model of instructional coaching. So I wouldn't really say that we use, I don't know, language is a funny one, isn't it? Like, you could say that is basically what we do as instructional coaching, but what I've explained is what is the system that we do. So lots of observations. The HOD is the filter, and is the person that staff will bounce their ideas off about what their next steps should be and what they should focus on.
Fantastic. It feels like in that approach, you really get to know your team really well, like you know their strengths, their weaknesses, and you can kind of work off that. So that does sound really fantastic. I want you to move on just to the idea of form time. So how can form time be used effectively, do you think, to address individual student needs and concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love form time. Form time is probably one of my favorite parts of my day. I love my form. I want to keep my form for as long as I possibly can. So form times, it's an interesting one. So at SOAN, we have 10 minutes of form time in the morning, and then we have 30 minutes in the afternoon. And as a school, the thing we've realized more and more is that this is probably the most important time of the day at setting, establishing, reinforcing culture. I think in some schools, I know that when I was at school, for example, form time, you just kind of go in and you just like chat to the people in your form, and that was it. And then the register gets done. There might be a few notices, and that's it. At SOAN, it looks very different. Form time is all about culture building. So form time is very much a chance for the tutor to forge a sense of team with the group of kids in front of them. So the way the school is structured at SOAN is that the form will have all their lessons together because they are streamed. And so that class is going to have maths together, English together, science together, history to geography together, PE together, music, art, all their subjects, they'll have them together as a form, and they'll come back to their form tutor. So the form tutor's primary job is, there's lots of kind of key priorities they have, but one of them is to really build a sense of team, to build a sense of identity around who we are as a form. I've got, my form is called Augustus, so we are 8 Augustus. What does that mean to be 8 Augustus? And so it's very important for the tutor to get to know each of their individual pupils, to pick up and notice every little thing that's going on with the pupils in their form, and to build that sense of team, but also to build culture that contributes to the school. So that might look like I said earlier, if someone's not putting the hand up, I want teachers to come to me and say, oh, this kid in your form isn't putting the hand up, well, they're not contributing very much. Then I'd go and have a chat with them, and I might say to them, I need to see you. This is your target for this week. I want to come in, and you want to be flying up, should be the first one up. What's stopping you? What's holding you back? Is there anything I can do to help? What support do you need? Or is it that they need a bit more accountability? Whatever it is, it's the tutor's job to help figure out how to improve the culture in that group. And so that's where the individual needs come into it. And the way that might look like in terms of building culture is in the like one of the first things every tutor does at SOAN in the morning is we do an equipment check. So the kids come in silence, they lay their equipment out on the desk in a very specific order. And that just means that in a 1 second glance, the form tutor can see whether they have all their equipment. And that happens every morning because, again, we want to set our kids up for success so that during the day, there's no reason why they can't get on with any of their lessons without any disruption or interruption or also I don't have a pen or I don't have my calculator. None of that happens at SOAN ever. And it's just phenomenal because the tutors set the forms up to succeed for the day. And that's where the accountability comes into it. So form tutors at the very start of year 7, we give them all the kids a pencil case with everything they need. We say to them, look, you've got everything you need. You must bring this with you every day. It's your responsibility. Responsibility is central to SOAN's culture and ethos. We want you to become empowered. You are the masters of your fate. You need to make sure that you are equipped. And that means that every lesson, you're not going to have to worry about whether you've got all your things with you, because every night you're going to check your bag. You're going to make sure you put that equipment in. If you forget, you lose a pen, you run out of a pen, whatever, your rubber is lost. What you can do is in the morning before school, at the school gates, we have a school shop. You can grab whatever you need from that. And it's a school shop, so you pay for what you need. And you can then be ready for your equipment check in the morning. So we've set them up for success. And then in the day of every morning, if they don't have a piece of equipment with them, they get a 15-minute detention at the end of the day. But we explain to them, look, I care so much about you. I'm going to hold you to account because I know you're capable of being prepared, being organized. It's a very important life skill to have. And I'm going to support you to make sure that you are more organized. And it's phenomenal. I remember at Christmas asking my year 7 form last year, I think, what are you most proud of? What your highlights been of your time at SOAN so far? And lots of them have, in fact, every single one of them said that at primary school, they weren't expected to bring their own equipment. It was just they had pots of things. And I guess that's how most primary schools work. They'll have pots of pens and pencils and rulers and things that they need for their various subjects. And a lot of them were surprised at how easy it was to just be organized and they feel like they've developed their organization skills at SOAN as a result. And they felt proud of the fact that they had become more organized. They'd learned to take responsibility. And so it boosts their self-esteem just by doing that one small thing of checking their equipment every day, because they feel like they have control over how their day is going to go in many ways, because they've realized they need to check their bag the night before, and it's a habit that they've developed. So that's just one example of how a simple system is in place to ensure that we're teaching responsibility, we're building the self-esteem, we're building culture, we're spotting any individual issues with the kids, and so not only are our standards really high, we're holding them to account, but we're empowering them by teaching them how to be responsible, how to look after themselves, and set the culture. And so that's what happens in the morning form time. And then after we've done the equipment check, we'll have a few minutes left, and we might do something where we say, right, what's our focus as a form? And we give them a specific target, and we say, one thing I've noticed is that sometimes when we're turning and talking to our partners during turn and talks, some of us are doing more of the work than others. But we are Augustus, we are a team. We need to make sure we're taking in turns. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a quick practice. I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to say your answer, and then the person next to you, you're going to invite the person next to you and say your turn. Make sure they have a chance. Listen carefully to what they say and go turn back again. Let the other person have a go and use all the time your teacher's given you rather than stopping once you're finished. Every second counts. Let's make the turn and talks the best in the whole school. Are we ready for it? So you're kind of setting them up to improve on something really concrete in the day, and then you get them to practice, for instance. And then you might say, okay, I can't wait to see you again in the afternoon, and I'm going to speak to some of your teachers and see who's been the best at doing turn and talk today. And then you might pop into one of their lessons, or you might speak to one of their teachers, and you get that feedback. And then you come back in PM form time and you're like, oh, I heard some great things about Omar. Your turn and talk today, Miss So-and-so was saying, was fantastic, really good. You are being so Augustus. And so what you're doing there is you're reinforcing that culture. You're present. They think you care enough about them to check in with their teachers. You reinforce what's right. And that's how you kind of build culture. So I think form time is perhaps the most important part of the day at kind of starting and ending their day, setting them up for success, holding them to account, getting them to live the values that you want them to. And I think that the more tutors can develop that culture, the more powerful the school culture will be.
Just as a quick question of that, is I might have picked this up wrong. I'm not sure. Did you say that all your form is always in the same class? If they're in maths and they're in science, they're in English, they're always together. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, off that question, that's obviously mixed ability setting then. Like, so they're not set in, let's say, highest achieving students go to the top set and then the lowest achieving students go to the bottom set. Is that correct?
They're streamed, so we have it's essentially sets, but the sets are the same for all subjects. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we have so we have two top streams, 2 second streams, a third and a fourth support group, and that'll be based on things. So the support group would be, so we have six classes in each year group. The support group will be the students who are perhaps still working on their phonics and have kind of need the most support with reading, and then the kind of support group above that is just more kind of still reading isn't quite strong, but they've passed their phonics checks, things like that, and then the rest of them is by their maths and English.
Okay, fantastic. I just wanted to double check, see how it was in your schools. So I just want to quickly say this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. We have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR 2324. That was JCTTR 2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Now, I wanted to quickly ask just one more question on the idea of form times. My question is, what role does form time play in developing student-teacher relationships?
Oh, that's a great question. So relationships are central to everything we do at SOAN. The first thing I would say on that is it's easy when you hear about a school like SOAN and we talk about strictness and demerits and all this kind of stuff about checks for listening and accountability to assume that the school, what's the school doing about relationships? But we take every opportunity we can to get to know our kids really well as individuals. We think it's very important to know each pupil. So you'll see form tutors in the morning before lineup, chatting to their form. At break, they'll be chatting to their form. At lunchtime, we have family lunch. So we sit with our form and we get to know them. We have conversations with them every day. We literally have form tutors will have lunch with their kids every single day, and it's wonderful. And form times can be a time when there's quite a lot of it can be a bit less structured than lesson time, where I might just have a bit of a laugh with my form. I know at Christmas time when we had the last day, we in my form we did lots of karaoke, we did a bit of Wham, we did a bit of Frozen at their request because they were loving their lives singing together, and all of those kinds of fun moments are there because as important as the accountability and strictness is, so is the warmth. The warmth is exceptionally important at building relationships. The kids need to see you as both the person who's going to hold the line and not let any misbehavior disrupt their learning. You're not going to accept any nonsense, any disrespect at all. But at the same time, when the teacher creates the opportunity and the space for it, there is a lot of fun. Some other things form tutors might do is, they might do what we call like a fun register. So instead of saying, when you say the names and they say yes sir, or good morning sir, you might say, all right, today you're going to say your favorite flavor of crisps or whatever, or what's your favorite, if you could have any pet in the world, what would it be? And you go through the register and it's a bit of fun. Or it might be that you just share a funny moment that happened that day, like sharing your highlight of the day in form time in the PM in the afternoon. Whatever it might be, or you might just share a funny thing that happened at break time that you wanted everyone to know about. And so there's a lot of relationship building that happens through that way, kind of in form time, but also individually through conversation. So the teachers get to know their tutor group really well outside of lessons as well. And what that allows is that those relationships then remind the pupils that we care about them as individuals, and we do care about them. We genuinely, all the teachers do want to know about that. We're very interested in our forms and what's going on in their lives, what their likes, their dislikes are, who's in their family, what pets they have, all this kind of stuff. It's just interesting. If you're a teacher, you find this kind of stuff interesting, and forms tutors are in kind of the best place to do that, because they see their forms every day and are with them pretty much a lot of the day during break times. And it means that the kids really understand that the strictness is there because we care about them, and it comes from a place of love ultimately. And that's kind of what we think embodies the idea of warm, strict really well.
Thank you. That was really well answered. I just have to say, like, just hearing from what you're saying, it sounds like the students really enjoy being at your school. I have a question from Shane Leaning here, and he says, "Thanks for a brilliant space. The key to success at your school sounds like culture, culture, culture. Would you say that the clear and consistent school culture is more important than teaching and learning approach you use, or vice versa?"
That is a brilliant question. I like to use the word synergy when I describe this. I think there's huge synergy in the two strands. So in fact, my role this year has been, I'm assistant principal for teaching and learning, but I've got two strands that I talk about when I'm doing staff training. So we've got the what I've called winning hearts strand and the winning minds strand. So in the winning minds strand of the pupils, it's all about how do you get them cognitively engaged, how do you get them to, all hands up, cold calling, turn and talk, and questioning and explanations and all this kind of stuff. And then the winning hearts part is all about cultivating your authority, building relationships, your presence in the classroom, your how you strike the balance between warm and strict. So I've almost given them equal weighting, as it were, and we discuss, and it's never the case that you kind of discuss one without discussing the other, really, because if you're talking about, for instance, all hands up cold calling, that is a technique, a strategy, it's a pedagogical tool, but it comes with the culture of merits, demerits, accountability. I expect more of you because I expect you to pay attention, but I also think it's incredible when you do pay attention. I'm going to reward you for it. I'm going to deliver that with a real sense of authority. But also it's a strategy. I need to make sure it's a question that everyone can put their hands up for. This is a teaching and learning idea. I want to assess whether or not my kids are participating and paying attention, because if they're not paying attention, I'm not going to be able to then check for understanding with as much reliability. So every strategy can be looked at through the lens of both pedagogy and teaching and learning, but also through culture and how you're going to contribute to the culture of the school. And that's very much a conscious and deliberate way in which I plan CPD at the school. And it means that staff do think about teaching and learning as well as culture at the same time, and understand that they are inextricably linked.
Yeah, I do think by the sounds of it, the two come hand in hand. So if you the teaching and learning strategy that you use comes hand in hand with the culture that you've developed at the school. If you didn't have the culture, then you couldn't have the teaching and learning strategies that you did. But if you didn't have the teaching and learning strategies, then it might not, the culture might not quite be there as well. So it kind of seems like it comes hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question just on one of the teaching and learning strategies that you have discussed. You've said that in your classroom you use a lot of turn and talk, plenty of turn and talk, which I do turn and talk myself. I wouldn't say I do plenty of turn and talk in one lesson. It's something that actually I do think is something that I need to personally improve on if I'm looking at myself reflectively. But my question is this: what strategies do you use to ensure that students are actually focused on the task or the question you've asked them to discuss? So what do you use to make sure that the students aren't discussing something completely random when you've asked them to turn and talk?
Yeah, so in order to understand what I'm about to say, I guess you need to kind of picture what the classroom looks like. So some of you would have seen in that video, but the desks are in rows and the teacher will stand at the front in a position where they can scan the room. So when I say, with your partners, go, the first thing I'm doing is my eyes are darting around the entire room and I'm looking to see, does everyone look like they're on task? Is at least one person in each pair talking? And then what you're doing is you're looking to see what you can see. If someone's off task, I feel like you can just see straight away. Because if you ask them a question about photosynthesis and the first thing they're doing when they're both turning and talking is just laughing at each other or like they're just giggling about something, you kind of know straight away that they are a bit off task. And you can listen into the first couple of rows. You can't quite hear what's going on at the back, but then that's where the accountability comes into it. And like I said, we have really high standards at our school. I want to be able to hold my kids to account for if they're making the wrong choice, but equally I want to really praise them if they are making the right choice. So at the end of that turn and talk, if I say 3, 2, 1, hands up, first of all, I'd expect every hand to go up in my classroom, not because I expect everyone to have a perfect answer ready, but because everyone has just either rehearsed or they've just listened to an answer, and therefore everyone should be willing and ready to share what it is that they've discussed. That's the minimum expectation, the minimum standard we all have in our classrooms at SOAN. And that's why, aside from the checks from listening, that's another example of where I'd expect 100% of hands to be up. So if someone's hand didn't go up at that point, I might think, does that mean they weren't talking about the thing that I wanted them to? And there needs to be something where I'm holding them to account. Because again, if I don't hold them to account, I'm letting them down. I'm letting them get away with not participating for those 20 seconds. And it might sound like a small amount of time, but every second counts. And if I'm not holding them to account, then like I said, I don't want to be letting them down and letting them get into bad habits of not being focused for that part of the lesson. So that's where I might then bring in that accountability, and I might pick on them to share their answer. And if they're really saying, oh, it becomes quite obvious in my experience when someone just hasn't done what you've asked them to, and then I would give them a demerit in that instance. If it's the case that they simply said, we were actually just really confused, sir, then what I would do is I would say, okay, I'm going to pause. I would pause the whole class at that point and just explain that if you're ever completely stuck during a turn and talk, it's imperative that once you both realize you don't know what to say, that you put your hand up and you ask me to clarify or ask for help in that moment. Because otherwise you're going to be sat there for 30 seconds, both staring at each other, not doing anything. And again, I don't want you to be the kind of peoples that just sit there and do nothing for 30 seconds. I want you to be the kind of peoples that are taking ownership of your learning and either asking me for and essentially asking me for help in that moment to clarify something, so that at least I know you're making an effort to try and do the thing that I've asked you to do. Because ultimately, that's what I'm interested in. Are you participating? Are you putting in the effort to learn? And then I would say to the class, in future, if I see you kind of not doing anything and then you have nothing to say at the end of it, then I'll just think either you haven't listened or you weren't willing to seek out any clarification, and that means that you weren't doing your best to give it 100%, and I cannot accept you not giving me 100%, and therefore I will give a demerit. So in that instance, I wouldn't give a demerit, but I would say to the class, in future, I will. And so again, that over time, you build a culture and you make explicit that culture where you set them up for success. I've told them what I expect them to do if they're stuck. I've given them the tools they need to help themselves. And if they still aren't willing to do that, then it's a culture issue. It's a choice they've made to not participate. It's a choice they've made to not seek out support when they need it. And therefore, I feel justified in holding them to account. And that's how you build accountability. And you also are raising your standards for all the kids in that class. You're expecting more of them. And you're ensuring that in future, anyone who maybe someone got away with secretly talking about something else and I didn't catch them that time, but they're going to see, oh, what if sir comes to me next time? Or what if sir expects this of me next time? I don't want to be caught out. I want to be in a position where I am ready with a good answer and I've done my best. And the culture shifts. And then once they're used to doing that, the habit forms, and then they won't be the kind of people that goes off task anyway, because the culture has now changed over time. And so I think that's a good way of illustrating how with any strategy in the classroom, you can shift the culture. You realize something's gone wrong, you give the pupils the support they need, and then you hold them to account for it, and then you set them off again, and you've given them everything you can, and then you make sure you hold the line, you hold them to account in future. And that's how culture is built over time. And that's how, in this instance, to answer your question, I make sure that during a turn and talk, the pupils will always be on task.
I'm just going to butt in there and just say, if you really enjoyed today's show, then you'll really like our show on Tuesday, the 23rd of January. You can see the link pinned to the top of this space now, because we're delighted to be joined by Sam Crome, who's going to be talking about one of the best books of 2023, in our opinion, The Power of Teams, how to create and lead thriving school teams. You can set a reminder on the space at the top of this space, and Catherine Taylor is going to be interviewing Sam Crome about the power of teams. So if you've enjoyed this show, you'll enjoy that show as well.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say, on the same idea of what you were just saying, I was reading a book called Tips for Teachers. It's a fantastic book by Craig Barton. And in that book, it kind of spoke on the same idea. So what he said was, let's say I tell a group of students to work in a group, or I've told students to turn and talk, I can hold them to account if they haven't done the task that I've asked them to do. Let's say I ask one of them a question and that they aren't able to answer that question because they actually just wasn't trying. I could hold them to account because, and I can hold them both to account, or the group to account, because it's kind of similar to a football team or a team. Like, they're a team at that particular time, and if a football team, did bad and they lost a game, that is completely normal for them to be punished because they've lost a game and they're upset about it. And it's completely normal for you as a teacher to hold students to account when you've asked them as a team or as a group or as a pair to discuss something as a team in a turn and talk, and it's completely, I think it's justified to ask them to hold them to account. My last thing I want to very quickly ask you, just to close this kind of conversation up, is you have been quoted in this conversation to say, don't think wow, ask how. So my question is this, Pritish: how can a school go from, let's say, an environment when they haven't got the culture developed, to a school that has developed the culture where they can have all students engaging, having their hands up and ready to answer the question?
Oh, that's a big question. So I would say, kind of under that banner of, whenever you notice something in any classroom, if you're looking to improve the culture of your school, my top tip would be, you need to go and seek out there'll always be pockets of excellence going on. Where is there excellence in the school? Or if you're willing and able to look outside of your own school, go and visit other schools. Sown, we are always open to visitors. You can always come to us. If you are interested in this specific elements that I've talked about today, look out and think, and then ask yourself how. Don't say wow and go, wow, this is incredible, aren't you lucky you've got such amazing kids? Because yes, our kids are amazing, but they didn't arrive to school all willing to participate, all being really polite to each other, all being really kind to each other, all working exceptionally hard, all of them doing all their homework all the time. We have built that culture deliberately, intentionally. So you have to be curious as a teacher or as a leader and dig into that. Why is it that kid held the door open for me, but in my school, kids don't hold the doors open very often? Why is it that every kid, while I was standing on this corridor, greeted me with a good morning, miss, or a good morning, sir, whereas at my school, that doesn't happen? Why is it that in Sown, whenever kids leave a classroom, they say, thank you for that lesson, sir, every single one, without fail, with eye contact, with a smile, and that doesn't really happen in my classroom? And you got to just not think, gosh, isn't this an amazing school? The kids must be brilliant. You need to ask yourself, what has the school done to cultivate this culture? If it is an individual child that stands out, you think, well, what have the parents done? What have the tutor done? What has the teachers done? What's going on that has led to this child behaving in this way? And it's only when you then see through that lens and you think, okay, there's a reason, there's something's gone on, there's this effect has multiple causes. Let's investigate those causes. Can I now replicate those causes and those mechanisms in my classroom, in my school? So if I go into other classrooms and I think, oh my gosh, this teacher's got more, their kids' hands are going up faster and straighter than in mine, or those kids are jumping out of their seats to answer questions in that classroom, whereas in mine, some of them are jumping out of their seats and some of them aren't. What do I need to do? What are they doing? Okay, they seem to be giving a lot more merits than me. Or then the way that they're praising the kids just comes across with, there's so much love in their voice. Have I got that much love in my voice? I wonder. Let me have a think. Let me go and ask them to come and observe me and give me feedback on those two things. Let me ask them, is there anything else you're doing to make sure that your kids are jumping out of their seats to answer your questions? And I guess you need a sense of humility and a sense of, I'm not doing everything right. I need to be able to improve. There's always something I can improve. And asking those questions and constantly thinking critically about your own practice and about your own things that you're in charge of in your school, and thinking, can I make this better? Is there a different way of thinking? Do I need to completely change my lens about something? So another example might be when it comes to behavior around the school. Is it a simple case of just telling the students to say thank you to their teachers after they leave the lesson? And if I tell the kids to do that and remind them of it, will they then get into the habit? And then once they get into the habit, it just over time becomes part of their character, where they're just the kind of people that say thank you. And actually that's what's going on there. Something really simple. Is it that I need to do something more widely about the culture of gratitude? Do the kids really understand how much their teachers work hard for them? Maybe that's something we need to make explicit with our kids. Like whenever I give a new booklet, a new worksheet to my kids, I always say to them, oh, and Miss Lamb in the science department has spent 40 or 50 hours writing this booklet for you. If you see her around, make sure you say thank you to her, because she has worked so hard to make this booklet that I'm going to be using to teach your lessons over the next 2 weeks. But she has worked her socks off in order to create that booklet. She's written it all from scratch. She spent hours on it. And because I've narrated that to them, suddenly the kids aren't taking the booklets for granted. They look after them more. They value them more. They realize how hard their teachers work. Suddenly the culture of gratitude is that little bit stronger in that classroom. So there's always something that goes on behind the behavior that you see there. And it's all about, can I unpick what it is? Can I unpick the causes here? And then can I replicate those causes in my own classroom, in my own school? And that curiosity is, I think, the most fundamental thing at starting to create and forge a culture that you see elsewhere. Because there's always, behind every culture, what is culture? Culture is just lots of actions. How do you get those actions to happen? Something's gone on to encourage those actions, to make those actions explicit, to instruct the pupils in carrying out those actions, to instruct the staff in carrying out those actions. And those will ultimately stem from some sort of value or idea, such as gratitude is important, or it's important to encourage kids to take responsibility, or you are the authority in the room, or it is important that as the authority you create a culture in your classroom, and therefore accountability is important. Therefore you're going to give demerits for these things, but you're also going to set them up for success. So it's about being curious and breaking down that chain of cause and effect and leading it down, I guess, ultimately to, is this something I value in my school? And how can I then translate that value into a culture?
Okay, thank you very much. We've gone slightly over there, but thank you for everyone that's been listening, and also thank you for your insights, Pritish. I feel like I've learned so much just from this session. It's been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can I just add that if anyone wants to visit, then you're more than welcome.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.